The blood dripping onto the washboard was what finally made Penelope Vance stop scrubbing that scorching afternoon in Santa Rosa, New Mexico Territory, in the summer of 1878. She stared at her hands, raw and cracked, the skin split open in several places where the lye soap and endless hours of labor had worn through flesh that had once been soft. The water in the basin turned pink, and she felt dizzy from the pain she had been ignoring for the past 3 hours. "Miss Vance, you all right over there?" called Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house porch, but Penelope did not answer. She could not seem to find her voice as she watched more blood seep from the wounds on her palms and fingers. The pile of unwashed linens beside her seemed to grow taller even as she looked at it, mocking her inability to keep up with the demand. Santa Rosa was a growing town, situated along what would become an important route for travelers and traders moving through New Mexico Territory. The railroad had not yet reached them, but everyone knew it was coming, and the population had swelled in anticipation. More people meant more laundry, and Penelope had foolishly thought she could handle the increased workload alone. She was 20 years old, had been doing laundry since she was a girl, and prided herself on her independence. Her parents had died 2 years prior in a cholera outbreak, leaving her with nothing but her skills and determination. But determination did not heal split skin or multiply the hours in a day. She tried to grip the washboard again, but her hands screamed in protest. Tears pricked her eyes, not from self-pity but from pure frustration. If she could not work, she could not eat. If she could not eat, she would lose the small room she rented behind the general store. The cycle was simple and brutal. "You need to stop that right now," a deep voice said from behind her, and Penelope whirled around, startled. She had not heard anyone approach, which was unusual given how alert she normally was. Living alone as a young woman in a frontier town had taught her to always be aware of her surroundings. The man standing there was unlike anyone she had seen in Santa Rosa before, and she had thought she knew most everyone by now. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun behind him. His arms, visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his work shirt, were corded with muscle, the kind that came from years of hard physical labor in unforgiving conditions. His hair was dark brown, longer than most men wore it in town, touching his shoulders and looking like it had been trimmed with a hunting knife rather than proper scissors. His jaw was strong and covered with several days' worth of beard growth, and his eyes were a striking gray-blue that reminded her of storm clouds over the mountains. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that suggested he could handle whatever trouble came his way, and there was something wild about him, something that spoke of vast open spaces and survival far from civilization. A mountain man, she realized. She had heard of such men but had never met one in person. "I am fine," Penelope said, which was obviously a lie given that her hands were still bleeding. She tried to hide them behind her back, though she knew he had already seen. "No, you are not," he said, his voice calm but firm. He stepped closer, and she noticed he moved with surprising grace for such a large man. "You are bleeding into your washing water, and your hands look like you have been fighting a wildcat." "My hands are my concern, not yours," she said, trying to sound authoritative but hearing the waver in her own voice. The pain was getting worse now that she had stopped working, as if her body had finally been given permission to acknowledge what she had been forcing it to endure. The man studied her for a long moment, and she felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see past all her defenses to the exhaustion and fear beneath. "What is your name?" he asked finally. "Penelope Vance, and you are trespassing on Mrs. Henderson's property." "Isaac Bradford," he said, inclining his head slightly. "And Mrs. Henderson sent me back here because she was worried about you. Said you have been working since before dawn and have not taken a break." Penelope felt a flash of irritation at the boarding house owner's interference, even though she knew it came from kindness. "I have work to finish. I cannot afford to take breaks." Isaac looked at the pile of laundry, then back at her bleeding hands, and something shifted in his expression. "You cannot afford not to. If you damage your hands permanently, you will not be able to work at all." Then what? She hated that he was right. She hated that this stranger had appeared out of nowhere and immediately identified the impossible situation she was in. Most of all, she hated the tears that were now threatening to fall despite her best efforts to hold them back. "I do not have a choice," she said quietly. "This is all I have. This is how I survive." Isaac was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Come with me. We are going to take care of your hands." "I cannot just leave all this work. It will still be here in an hour," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And you will be in better shape to finish it. Now come on." There was something commanding in his voice, but not cruel. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed because his judgment was sound, not because he enjoyed wielding power. Penelope found herself following him despite her reservations, cradling her injured hands against her chest. Isaac led her not toward the boarding house but toward the general store. He seemed to know where he was going, moving with purpose through the dusty streets of Santa Rosa. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Penelope was suddenly aware of how thirsty she was, how long it had been since she had drunk any water. Inside the general store, the proprietor, Mr. Dalton, looked up from his ledger and nodded at Isaac. "Find what you need," he said, which struck Penelope as odd. Most storekeepers watched customers like hawks to prevent theft. Isaac gathered supplies with the efficiency of someone who had treated injuries before. Clean cloth for bandages, a small bottle of carbolic acid for disinfecting, some salve that Mr. Dalton said was good for wounds, and a bar of gentler soap than the harsh, lye kind Penelope had been using. He paid for everything without hesitation, counting out coins from a leather pouch at his belt. "You do not need to do this," Penelope protested weakly as he guided her outside to the water trough, but Isaac just shook his head. "Yes, I do," he said simply. He had her sit on the bench outside the store, then knelt in front of her, which put them at eye level despite his height. Gently, he took one of her hands in his much larger ones. His palms were calloused and rough, but his touch was surprisingly tender as he examined the damage. "This is going to hurt," he warned her before carefully pouring water over her torn skin to clean away the blood and soap residue. Penelope bit her lip hard to keep from crying out, tasting copper. Isaac's jaw tightened as he worked, as if her pain bothered him, which seemed strange given that they were complete strangers. He cleaned both hands thoroughly, then applied the carbolic acid. This did make Penelope gasp, and Isaac paused. "I am sorry," he said, meeting her eyes. "But infection out here can kill you. It needs to be done properly." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and let him continue. Once the wounds were disinfected, he applied the salve with gentle precision, then wrapped her hands in the clean cloth, creating neat bandages that protected her palms while still allowing her fingers some mobility. "You have done this before," Penelope observed, her voice shaky from the pain but steady enough. "Had to learn," Isaac said, tying off the final bandage. "When you live up in the mountains for months at a time, you become your own doctor, and sometimes you have to patch up your companions too." "You are a trapper?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her discomfort. "Was," he said, sitting back on his heels. "Fur trade is not what it used to be. Been looking for something different, something more settled." Santa Rosa seems an odd choice for a mountain man wanting to settle, Penelope said, attempting a smile despite everything. Isaac returned the smile and it transformed his face, making him seem younger and less fierce. Maybe, but I have heard it is growing. Thought there might be opportunities here. They sat in silence for a moment, and Penelope became aware of people watching them from various points around the street. A young woman and a strange man sitting together was bound to draw attention, but she found she did not care as much as she probably should have. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the bandages and the medicine. I will pay you back as soon as I can." "No need," Isaac said, standing and offering her his hand to help her up. "But I do have a proposition for you." Penelope felt her guard go up immediately. In her experience, when men had propositions for young women alone in the world, they were rarely respectable. But something in Isaac's steady gaze made her wait to hear him out. "You need help with your laundry business," he said. "You are taking on more work than one person can handle, and it is destroying you. What if I hired someone to help you? I would pay their wages and you would split the work." Penelope stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Isaac was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know what it is like to be alone and struggling, and I know what it is like to be too proud to ask for help even when you need it. I have some money saved up, and I am looking for ways to invest in this town if I am going to make it my home. Helping you seems like a good place to start." It was one of the strangest offers Penelope had ever received. Charity disguised as business, coming from a man who looked like he belonged in the wilderness, not in polite society. Every practical bone in her body told her to refuse, to maintain her independence and not become beholden to anyone. But her hands throbbed beneath their bandages, and the pile of laundry waiting for her seemed insurmountable, and she was so very tired. "I would pay you back," she said firmly. "Once I am earning enough with the extra help, I would pay back every cent you spend on wages." Isaac nodded. "If that is what you need to make this acceptable, then agreed. And I choose who you hire," she added. "I will not work with just anyone." "Fair enough," Isaac said. "Do you have someone in mind?" Penelope thought for a moment. "There is a widow, Mrs. Chen, who came here from California with her husband 2 years ago. He died in a mining accident last winter, and she has been struggling to make ends meet. She asked me if I needed help a few months back, but I could not afford to pay anyone then. Then let us go talk to Mrs. Chen," Isaac said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world to change someone's life on a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Chen lived in a small adobe house on the eastern edge of town, where the buildings started to spread out and the desert reasserted itself. She was a small woman in her mid-30s, with threads of gray in her black hair and kind eyes that had seen sorrow. When she opened her door to find Penelope and Isaac on her doorstep, those eyes widened in surprise. Penelope explained the situation, with Isaac standing quietly beside her, his presence somehow both unobtrusive and unmistakable. When she finished, Mrs. Chen looked between them with an expression that suggested she was trying to solve a puzzle. "You are offering me work?" she asked Isaac. "Paid work. I am offering to pay you to help Miss Vance with her laundry business," Isaac clarified. "The work would be for her, but the wages would come from me until the business is profitable enough for her to take over paying you herself." "Why, Mrs. Chen?" asked bluntly, which Penelope appreciated. At least she was not the only one who found this arrangement unusual. Isaac seemed to consider this question seriously. "Because I can," he said finally, "and because it seems like the right thing to do." Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment, then looked at Penelope. "You trust this man?" It was a good question, and one Penelope had to think about. She had only met Isaac an hour ago. She knew nothing about him except that he was strong, could bandage wounds, and was willing to spend his money helping strangers. By all reasonable standards, she should not trust him at all. But there was something in the way he attended to her hands, the gentleness in his rough fingers, the genuine concern in his eyes. There was something in the way he spoke, direct and honest without any of the oily charm she associated with men who had ulterior motives. "Yes," she said, surprising herself. "I do." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "Then I accept. When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning," Penelope said, feeling a weight lift from her chest even as she spoke. "If that suits you." "It suits me very well, Mrs. Chen said, and her smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. As they walked back toward the center of town, Penelope felt strange, lighter somehow, as if she had been carrying a burden for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to set it down. Isaac walked beside her, matching his longer stride to her shorter one, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust with each step. "Where are you staying?" Penelope asked, realizing she knew almost nothing practical about this man who had just changed her circumstances so dramatically. "Been camping outside of town," Isaac said, "but I am looking for a more permanent situation. Maybe I will talk to Mrs. Henderson about a room at the boarding house." "She will definitely have questions," Penelope warned. "She is kind but very curious about everyone's business." Isaac smiled slightly. "I have nothing to hide." They had reached the boarding house, where the pile of laundry still waited in the yard, though it seemed less daunting now that Penelope knew help was coming. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes sharp as they took in Penelope's bandaged hands and Isaac's proximity. "You got her sorted out?" she asked Isaac, as if they had had a prior conversation about this, which apparently they had. "Hands are bandaged and I have hired help for her starting tomorrow," Isaac reported. "Mrs. Chen from the east side of town." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "Good woman. Lost her husband in that cave-in at the Silver Bell mine. She needs the work." Then she turned to Isaac with an appraising look. "I suppose you will be wanting a room now." "If you have one available," Isaac said. "I do. Monthly rate is $8, includes breakfast and dinner. Laundry is extra, though I imagine Miss Vance here would give you a fair rate." Penelope felt herself blush, which was ridiculous. Doing laundry for Isaac would be purely professional. The fact that she had just been thinking about how his hands had felt holding hers was completely irrelevant. "Agreed," Isaac said. And just like that, he became a resident of Santa Rosa rather than a passing stranger. Mrs. Henderson showed Isaac to his room while Penelope attempted to return to her work, but her bandaged hands made it impossible to grip the washboard properly. After a few frustrating minutes, she gave up and started sorting the laundry instead, separating whites from colors, delicate items from sturdy work clothes. It was something she could do without straining her injuries, and it would make tomorrow's work easier. She was folding a stack of already dried linens when Isaac reappeared, having changed from his trail dusty clothes into a cleaner shirt and trousers, though he still looked every inch the mountain man. His hair was tied back now, revealing more of his face, and Penelope found herself staring before she caught herself and looked away. "Mrs. Henderson says dinner is at 6, he said, leaning against the porch post. "She also says you usually eat in the kitchen after everyone else is done, but she would like you to join us in the dining room today." "That is kind of her, but I still have work to do," Penelope said, even though her stomach was growling at the mention of food. "No, you do not," Isaac said firmly. "Your hands need to rest. The laundry will wait until tomorrow when you have help." "I cannot afford to fall behind. You also cannot afford to make your injuries worse," Isaac interrupted, and I suspect you have not eaten since breakfast, if then." Penelope wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too hungry, and the concern in his voice made something in her chest feel warm and unfamiliar. "Fine," she said, more ungraciously than she meant to. "But I am not used to being told what to do." "I noticed," Isaac said, and there was amusement in his voice. "But sometimes the hardest thing about being independent is learning when to accept help." Those words stayed with Penelope through the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. She cleaned herself up as best she could with her bandaged hands, changed into her better dress, and presented herself in Mrs. Henderson's dining room at 6 o'clock sharp, feeling self-conscious and out of place. The boarding house had 5 other residents at present: a young schoolteacher named Miss Palmer, 2 prospectors who were brothers named Jed and Tom Carter, a traveling salesman called Mr. Finch, and now Isaac. They all looked up when Penelope entered, surprise evident on most faces since she usually kept to herself. "Miss Vance, come sit here," Mrs. Henderson said, gesturing to a seat between Miss Palmer and Isaac. It was a deliberate placement, Penelope suspected, designed to make her feel more comfortable and possibly to encourage whatever Mrs. Henderson thought might be developing between her and Isaac. The meal was simple but hearty: roast chicken, potatoes, green beans that had come in on the last supply wagon from Albuquerque, and bread that Mrs. Henderson baked fresh every day. Penelope's injured hands made eating awkward, but she managed, grateful when Isaac quietly cut her chicken into smaller pieces when Mrs. Henderson was distracted serving dessert. The conversation around the table was lively, with Mr. Finch dominating most of it with stories from his travels. Penelope mostly listened, unused to social dining and uncertain what to contribute. But Isaac seemed equally quiet, answering questions about himself briefly but not volunteering much. He had come from the Colorado mountains, he said when pressed. Had been trapping and hunting there for the past 5 years. Before that, he had lived in Montana Territory, and before that, Pennsylvania, where he had been born. He was 27 years old, had no family left, and was looking to settle somewhere he could put down roots. "Why Santa Rosa?" Miss Palmer asked, echoing the question Penelope had posed earlier. Isaac glanced at Penelope before answering. Seemed like a place that could use another pair of hands, a place that was building toward something. After dinner, Penelope helped Mrs. Henderson clear the table despite the older woman's protests. In the kitchen, Mrs. Henderson gave her a knowing look. "That is a good man," she said, nodding toward the dining room where Isaac was still sitting, talking with the Carter brothers. "Rough around the edges, but good through and through." "I can always tell." "You only just met him," Penelope protested, though she could not deny she felt the same way. "Some things you just know," Mrs. Henderson said with the confidence of someone who had been reading people for 60 years. "He looks at you like you are something precious. You could do worse." "He bandaged my hands and hired help for me," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "That does not mean anything beyond kindness." "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, but her smile suggested she thought otherwise. That night, lying in her small room behind the general store, Penelope found herself thinking about Isaac Bradford instead of worrying about tomorrow's work. She thought about the careful way he had wrapped her hands, the steadiness of his presence, the storm cloud color of his eyes. She thought about how he had seen her struggling and simply acted to help, without asking for anything in return. She thought about how alone she had felt since her parents died, and how, for the first time in 2 years, she had sat at a dinner table with other people and felt like maybe she belonged somewhere after all. The next morning, Penelope met Mrs. Chen at the boarding house at dawn, her hands still bandaged but feeling somewhat better after a night's rest. The older woman arrived with her hair neatly braided and her sleeves already rolled up, ready to work. "Show me your system," Mrs. Chen said, all business. "I will follow your lead." It was a relief to work with someone experienced and capable. Mrs. Chen had done laundry for mining camps in California and knew all the tricks for getting stains out of fabric and preserving the life of linens. With two of them working, the pile that had seemed impossible yesterday began to diminish at a reasonable pace. Isaac appeared mid-morning, carrying 3 cups of coffee from the dining room. He handed them out without comment, then sat on the porch steps, apparently content to watch them work. Penelope found his presence oddly comforting rather than intrusive. He did not offer unwanted advice or make awkward conversation. He just sat there, a solid and reassuring presence, occasionally answering questions from Mrs. Henderson or helping move the heavy wash water basin when it needed to be refilled. Around noon, when the sun was at its hottest, Isaac stood and stretched, his shirt pulling tight across his muscled shoulders. "I am going to the mercantile to see about work," he announced. "Is there anything either of you needs while I am out?" "You are looking for work?" Penelope asked, surprised. She had assumed he had enough money saved to live on for a while, given how freely he was spending to help her. "Money does not last forever if you are not earning more," Isaac said practically. "Besides, I need something to do with my time. I am not built for idleness." He returned several hours later with news that he had found work at the lumber yard on the outskirts of town. They needed someone strong who could handle the heavy timber coming in from the mountains, and Isaac's years of physical labor had prepared him perfectly for such work. "When do you start?" Mrs. Henderson asked that evening at dinner. "Tomorrow," Isaac said. "Early shift, which suits me. I have always been an early riser." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Penelope and Mrs. Chen worked together on laundry 6 days a week, with Sundays off for rest and church if they chose to attend. Isaac worked at the lumber yard, coming home each evening tired but satisfied, sawdust in his hair and the smell of fresh cut pine on his clothes. They all took their meals at Mrs. Henderson's table, and slowly, Penelope found herself relaxing into a kind of life she had not known since her parents died. More than that, she found herself increasingly aware of Isaac. The way he listened when she talked about her day, really listened, with his full attention focused on her words. The way he carried heavy things without being asked, simply noticing when someone needed help and providing it. The way he laughed, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from his chest and made everyone around him want to smile too. She noticed how the other men in town treated him with respect, despite his being a newcomer, how his quiet confidence and obvious strength commanded a certain deference. She noticed how children were drawn to him, how he would stop to help a boy with a broken wagon wheel, or show a group of kids how to tie proper knots with rope. And she noticed how he looked at her, with a warmth in his gray-blue eyes that made her stomach flip in ways she was not entirely prepared for. One evening about a month after Isaac had arrived in Santa Rosa, Penelope was hanging laundry to dry in the fading light when he appeared beside her, taking a wet sheet from her hands and hanging it himself, his height making it easier to reach the line. "Your hands have healed well," he observed, nodding at her palms, which were indeed much better now that she was not overworking them. "Thanks to you," Penelope said. "If you had not stepped in when you did, I do not know what would have happened." Isaac was quiet for a moment, hanging another sheet with careful precision. "I am glad I was there at the right time," he said finally, "though I would have preferred you never got hurt in the first place." "That is life, though," Penelope said, trying to keep her tone light. We all get hurt sometimes. True, Isaac agreed. He finished hanging the last sheet, then turned to face her fully. The evening light turned his hair almost gold at the tips, and Penelope had to resist the urge to reach up and touch it. But some hurts can be prevented if people look out for each other. There was something in his voice, an intensity that made Penelope's heart beat faster. "Is that what we are doing?" she asked softly. "Looking out for each other? I hope so," Isaac said. He took a step closer, close enough that Penelope could see the different shades of gray and blue in his eyes, could smell the pine and honest sweat of his day's work. "I also hope I am not misreading things when I say that I have come to care for you, a great deal more than just friendly concern." Penelope's breath caught. She had suspected, had hoped, but hearing the words spoken aloud made everything suddenly real and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "You are not misreading anything," she whispered. "I care for you too." Isaac's face broke into a smile that transformed him completely. And then his hand was cupping her cheek with the same gentleness he had shown when bandaging her hands, and he was leaning down, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She did not want to. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, tentative in the way of two people discovering something new and precious together. Isaac's lips were warm, and his beard was softer than Penelope had imagined, and when he pulled back slightly to look at her, his eyes were full of wonder. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I wish you had done it sooner," Penelope said, then blushed at her own boldness. Isaac laughed, that deep rumbling sound she had come to love, and kissed her again, more confidently this time. Penelope melted into it, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him, the way he held her like she was something infinitely valuable. When they finally broke apart, the sun had set completely, and stars were beginning to appear in the vast New Mexico sky. They stood there in the twilight, foreheads touching, both of them breathing a bit harder than normal. "I should probably ask your permission to court you properly," Isaac said, sounding slightly dazed. "There is an order to these things." "You have my permission," Penelope said, smiling against his shoulder where her head had come to rest. "Though I think we might have done things a bit backward. I have never been much good at following conventional paths," Isaac admitted, his arms tightening around her. "But I mean to do this right. I want everyone in Santa Rosa to know that I am courting you with honorable intentions." "And what exactly are those intentions?" Penelope asked, her heart hammering because she thought she knew but needed to hear him say it. Isaac pulled back enough to look at her properly, his expression serious and earnest. "To marry you if you will have me. Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but when you are ready. To build a life with you here in Santa Rosa. To take care of you and any family we might have. To wake up every morning grateful that I happened to be in the right place at the right time to meet you." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears, tears that came from a heart that had been closed off and guarded for so long suddenly opening wide. "I would like that," she said. "All of it. Very much." They kissed again under the stars, and if Mrs. Henderson saw them from her kitchen window and smiled to herself knowingly, well, that was just fine with both of them. The courtship that followed was proper by the standards of Santa Rosa society, but it was also infused with the easy intimacy of two people who had already seen each other at their most vulnerable. Isaac took Penelope on walks around town and out into the desert when the evening air cooled things down. They attended the Sunday church service together, sitting side by side in the back pew, their shoulders touching. He brought her small gifts, a hair ribbon from the general store, a smooth river stone he found that was almost perfectly round, a book of poetry from a traveling merchant's collection. Penelope found herself laughing more than she had in years, found herself making plans that extended beyond just surviving to the next week. With Mrs. Chen's help, the laundry business was thriving, and she was actually beginning to save money. She paid Isaac back for Mrs. Chen's first month of wages as promised, and though he protested, he accepted the money because he understood that her independence mattered to her. The town watched their courtship with interest and general approval. Isaac had proven himself to be hardworking and honest, and everyone agreed that Penelope deserved happiness after struggling alone for so long. The Carter brothers teased Isaac mercilessly at the boarding house dinners, but it was good-natured teasing, the kind that came from acceptance and friendship. 3 months after that first kiss, Isaac took Penelope to a spot just outside of town where a small creek ran through a grove of cottonwood trees, one of the few truly green places in the desert landscape. They sat on a blanket he had brought, eating cold chicken and bread, watching the water flow past. "I have been saving money," Isaac said, seemingly out of nowhere. "Between what I earn at the lumber yard and some investments I have made, I have enough to buy some land." Penelope looked at him, her heart beginning to race. "Land? There is a plot about a mile from here, got a natural spring on it, good soil for a garden, room enough for a house and maybe some animals. I spoke to the man who owns it, and he is willing to sell for a fair price." Isaac turned to face her fully. "I was thinking it would be a good place to build a home, our home, if you will have me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Penelope saw a simple gold band with a small but bright garnet set in it, red as desert sunset. "I know we have not been courting long by some standards," Isaac said, "but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Penelope Vance, will you marry me?" Penelope launched herself at him with enough force that they both fell back on the blanket, laughing. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, absolutely yes." Isaac slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, which seemed like a sign that this was meant to be. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, making plans and dreaming aloud about the life they would build together. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Santa Rosa. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Chen helped Penelope make her dress, a simple but elegant design in pale blue that complemented her dark hair and brown eyes. Miss Palmer wove wildflowers into a crown for her hair. The Carter brothers stood up with Isaac, along with a few men from the lumber yard who had become his friends. The church was packed with what seemed like half the town, all of them eager to witness the marriage of the laundress and the mountain man, a match that had started with an act of kindness and blossomed into genuine love. The minister's words seemed to float over Penelope as she stood beside Isaac, her hand in his much larger one, his thumb moving in slow circles against her palm, when he said, "I do." His voice was strong and clear and full of promise. When she echoed the words back, her voice shook with emotion but not with doubt. There was not a single doubt in her mind. They kissed as husband and wife for the first time to enthusiastic applause and cheering, and Penelope felt like her heart might burst from sheer happiness. The celebration afterward was held in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, expanded into the yard because there were too many people to fit inside. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and impromptu dancing broke out as the sun set and lanterns were lit. Isaac danced with Penelope, surprisingly graceful despite his size, and she laughed as he spun her around, her blue dress flaring out. Late in the evening they slipped away from the party, heading to the small house Isaac had been building on the land he had purchased. It was not finished yet, but it had 4 walls, a roof, a proper floor, and a bed, which was all they needed for their wedding night. Inside, with the door closed against the world, Isaac cupped Penelope's face in his hands and kissed her with a reverence that made her tremble. "My wife," he murmured against her lips, as if testing out the word. "My husband," she replied, and they both smiled. What followed was tender and passionate and occasionally fumbling, but it was theirs, this joining of two people who had found each other against all odds in a harsh and unforgiving land. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, windows open to let in the cool night air, listening to the sounds of the desert settling into darkness. "I never thought I would have this," Penelope confessed quietly, her head on Isaac's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "After my parents died, I thought I would just work until I could not work anymore, and that would be my life." Isaac's arm tightened around her. "You will never have to face anything alone again," he promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the security of promises made and meant. The first year of their marriage was one of hard work, but also deep contentment. Isaac finished building their house, adding rooms and features as he had time and money. Penelope continued her laundry business with Mrs. Chen, though she gradually began to take on less work herself as Isaac's wages and his various investments began to provide more financial security. The town of Santa Rosa continued to grow around them. The railroad was coming closer, and new businesses were opening to serve the increasing population. Isaac left his job at the lumber yard to start his own freight business, using his knowledge of the mountains and wilderness to guide supply wagons through difficult terrain. It was dangerous work, but it paid well, and Isaac had a natural talent for it. Penelope discovered she was pregnant in the spring of their second year of marriage. She told Isaac one evening when he returned from a freight run, dusty and tired but lighting up immediately when she shared the news. "A baby," he breathed, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Isaac admitted, "but yes, so very happy." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though the summer heat was oppressive. Isaac fussed over Penelope like she was made of glass, which she found both irritating and endearing. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Henderson took over most of the laundry work, insisting that Penelope rest and prepare for motherhood. Their son was born in October of 1880, during the first cool week after the long hot summer. The labor was long and difficult, with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Chen attending as midwives. Isaac paced outside like a caged animal until Mrs. Henderson finally took pity on him and let him in to hold Penelope's hand during the final hours. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Isaac cried. Penelope had never seen him cry before, but tears rolled down his cheeks as he held their tiny son for the first time, this huge rough man cradling new life with infinite gentleness. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked, exhausted but euphoric. Isaac looked at her, then back at the baby. "I always liked the name Thomas, after my father." "Thomas Bradford," Penelope said, testing it out. "It is perfect." Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to take after his father in temperament, observing the world with calm gray-blue eyes. Isaac was a devoted father, often getting up in the night to walk with the baby when he fussed, singing old songs in his deep voice until Thomas settled. The freight business continued to grow, and Isaac hired several men to work for him, becoming one of the more successful businessmen in Santa Rosa. But success did not change him. He was still the same man who had bandaged a struggling laundress's hands, still the same man who believed in helping where he could. When Thomas was 2, Penelope became pregnant again. This time she was more confident, knowing what to expect, though each pregnancy was its own experience. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1883, arriving faster than Thomas had, as if she was impatient to join the world. They named her Sarah, after Penelope's mother, and she had her mother's dark hair and her father's strong will. From the very beginning, she knew what she wanted and was not shy about making her desires known. With 2 children, life became busier and more chaotic, but also richer. The house echoed with laughter and the sound of small feet running. Thomas was a gentle big brother, watching over Sarah with protective care that reminded Penelope of Isaac. Mrs. Chen eventually married a widowed rancher and moved to his property outside of town, though she remained close friends with Penelope and often visited. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1884, leaving the boarding house to Miss Palmer, who had become like a daughter to her. The loss hit both Penelope and Isaac hard, as the older woman had been instrumental in bringing them together and had remained a constant source of support and wisdom. Life continued its forward motion. Santa Rosa got its railroad connection in 1885, and the town exploded in size almost overnight. Isaac's freight business adapted, focusing more on local deliveries and supply runs to remote mining operations. Penelope eventually sold her laundry business to a young couple who had just arrived in town, using the money to invest in Isaac's company and in property around Santa Rosa. They had one more child, another son, born in 1886 when Penelope was 28 and Isaac was 35. They named him James, and he was the wild one, always getting into things, always pushing boundaries. He kept them on their toes and made them laugh with his antics. Through it all, through the challenges of raising children and running a business and navigating the changes that came with a growing town, Penelope and Isaac's love remained the foundation everything else was built on. They still took walks together in the evenings when they could, still sat on their porch after the children were in bed, talking about everything and nothing. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Isaac surprised Penelope with a trip, something they had never done before. They left the children with friends and traveled to Albuquerque for a week, staying in a real hotel, eating in restaurants, attending a theater performance. It was a glimpse of a different kind of life, elegant and refined, and while Penelope enjoyed it, she was also happy to return home to Santa Rosa and their children and their real life. "Would you have wanted a different life?" Isaac asked her on the train ride home. "Something more refined, more comfortable." Penelope took his hand, this man who had changed her entire world with a simple act of kindness 12 years ago. "No," she said firmly. "This is exactly the life I want, with you." Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who showed an aptitude for numbers and business. Sarah was bright and bold, determined to become a teacher like Miss Palmer. James remained the wild child, always talking about adventure and exploration, though he loved his family fiercely. As the 1890s arrived, Penelope and Isaac found themselves entering middle age with grace. Isaac's hair was threaded with silver now, though he was still as strong and capable as ever. Penelope had fine lines around her eyes, marks of years spent laughing and living fully. The house they had built together was full of life and love, with 3 children growing into their own people, with friends coming and going, with the routines and rituals that made a place a home. On Sunday afternoons, they often had large gatherings, with the house overflowing with food and conversation and music. On one such afternoon in 1895, Penelope stood on her porch watching Isaac play with James in the yard, the two of them wrestling like bear cubs. Thomas was reading under a tree, already serious at 15, while Sarah chased butterflies with the intensity she brought to everything. Mrs. Chen, visiting from her ranch with her husband and their adopted children, came to stand beside Penelope. "You have built a beautiful life," she said. "We have," Penelope agreed, because it had never been just her or just Isaac. It had been both of them together and all the people who had helped along the way. "Sometimes I think about that day when my hands were bleeding, when I thought everything was falling apart. And Isaac appeared like an answer to a prayer you had not even prayed," Mrs. Chen finished, smiling. "Exactly like that," Penelope said. "The luckiest day of my life, even though it started as one of the worst." That evening, after their guests had left and the children were in bed, Penelope and Isaac sat on their porch as they had so many evenings before. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. "You ever miss it?" Penelope asked, leaning against Isaac's shoulder. "The mountains, the wilderness, the freedom of that life." Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted, "but I would not trade this life for anything." That freedom was lonely, even if I did not realize it at the time. What we have built together, this is everything I never knew I needed." Penelope tilted her face up to kiss him, and after all these years it still felt like coming home. "I love you," she said. "I tell you often, but I do not think I can say it enough." "I love you too," Isaac replied, his arms tightening around her. "From that first day when I saw you bleeding into the wash water and felt my heart break for you. I think I started falling in love with you right then, even though I did not understand it yet." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but they would face them together, as they always had. Years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of children growing up and a community deepening its roots. Thomas went to college in Santa Fe, studying business and law, and returned to help Isaac expand the freight company into a proper shipping enterprise. Sarah did become a teacher, taking over Miss Palmer's position when the older woman retired, and she was beloved by her students for her enthusiasm and patience. James was the one who surprised them all. At 18, he announced he wanted to learn his father's original trade, to spend time in the mountains trapping and hunting and living the life Isaac had once led. It was hard for Penelope to let him go, but Isaac understood. "Let him have his adventure," Isaac told Penelope as they stood on the porch watching James ride away into the mountains with supplies and determination. "He will come back when he is ready, just like I found my way to where I needed to be," and Isaac was right. James returned after 2 years, leaner and harder and more settled in himself. He had gotten the wildness out of his system and was ready to find his place in the family business and the community. All 3 of their children eventually married and had children of their own, filling Penelope and Isaac's house with grandchildren who called them Nana and Papa, and kept them young with their energy and curiosity. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children organized a celebration at the Santa Rosa Community Hall. It seemed like the entire town turned out, a testament to the lives Penelope and Isaac had lived and the impact they had had on the community. People stood up to tell stories about times Isaac had helped them, about laundry services Penelope had provided when they needed it most, about the example their marriage had set. Penelope cried happy tears through most of it, holding tight to Isaac's hand. They were both in their 50s now, grandparents, respected members of the community, far from the struggling laundress and wandering mountain man they had once been. "How did we get so lucky?" Penelope asked Isaac that night as they finally returned to their now quiet house. "We were not lucky," Isaac said, pulling her close. "We were brave enough to accept help and smart enough to choose each other and stubborn enough to keep choosing each other every single day since." He was right, Penelope realized. Luck had brought Isaac to Santa Rosa on the day her hands were bleeding, but everything after that had been choice. The choice to trust, to love, to build something lasting together. They made it to their 35th anniversary, celebrating quietly with just their children and grandchildren. Isaac was slowing down now, his body finally showing the wear of a lifetime of hard physical work. But his mind was sharp, and his love was as strong as ever. On a cool evening in the fall of 1914, Penelope and Isaac sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 60s now, their hair fully gray, their faces deeply lined with years of sun and laughter and love. "I have been thinking," Isaac said, his arm around Penelope's shoulders, "about all the turns life took to bring us to each other. If I had stayed in the mountains just one more season, if you had not hurt your hands that particular day, if I had walked down a different street in Santa Rosa." "But you did not," Penelope said. "You walked exactly where you needed to walk, and I was exactly where I needed to be, and we found each other." "We did," Isaac agreed. "And I would do it all again, every hard day and every setback, just to end up right here with you." Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling the house with noise and life. Thomas ran the shipping business with competence and integrity, maintaining the reputation his father had built. Sarah influenced countless young lives through her teaching. James worked alongside his brother, but spent his free time exploring the wilderness, finding a balance between the call of the wild and the pull of family. As Penelope and Isaac moved into their 70s, their health remained relatively good, though they moved more slowly and tired more easily. They spent their days in gentle routines, tending their garden, sitting in the sunshine, entertaining grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were beginning to appear. One afternoon in the spring of 1919, Penelope was organizing old papers when she came across a piece of cloth, carefully folded and preserved. She opened it and realized it was one of the bandages Isaac had used on her hands that first day they met, 41 years ago. She had saved it without really thinking about it, and now it felt like a precious relic of the beginning of everything good in her life. She showed it to Isaac that evening, and he held it carefully, his old hands gentle with the fragile fabric. "I remember that day so clearly," he said. "You were trying so hard to be strong, to not show how much pain you were in, and I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met." "I was not brave," Penelope protested. "I was just desperate." "Sometimes they are the same thing," Isaac said wisely. "And you let me help you, which took its own kind of courage." They put the bandage away carefully, a tangible piece of their history. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, their family threw an enormous celebration. All 3 of their children were there with their spouses, along with 8 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. The Santa Rosa community, which had grown into a proper small city now, honored them with a ceremony recognizing their contributions to the town's development and their exemplary life together. Isaac gave a short speech, his voice still strong even at 77. "50 years ago," he said, "I met a young woman who was working herself to death because she saw no other choice. I helped her because it was the right thing to do, but really, she saved me. She gave me a home, a family, a reason to stop wandering. Everything good in my life came from that one moment of choosing to stop and help someone who needed it." Penelope was crying openly as the crowd applauded. They danced together, moving slowly to music provided by some of their grandchildren who had learned various instruments. In that moment, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had helped build, Penelope felt a deep sense of contentment and completion. Isaac lived to be 83, passing peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1934 with Penelope holding his hand. His last words to her were, "I love you. Always have, always will." Penelope grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had had 56 years with the love of her life, had built a family and a legacy with him. She stayed in their house, surrounded by memories, visited constantly by children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She told stories about Isaac to the younger generations, keeping his memory alive. About how he had appeared like an answer to a prayer, how he had been strong and gentle, protective but never controlling, how he had loved her with a steadiness that never wavered. Penelope lived another 5 years, dying peacefully at the age of 76 in the spring of 1939. Her last words were about Isaac, telling her gathered children that she was ready to see him again. They buried her beside him in the Santa Rosa cemetery, under the wide New Mexico sky, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and dates and the words, "Together always." Their children and grandchildren continued to thrive, carrying forward the values and love that Isaac and Penelope had modeled. The shipping business Thomas ran eventually became one of the largest in New Mexico. Sarah's former students, numbering in the hundreds, included teachers and business people and community leaders who carried her influence forward. James raised his children with a love of both community and wilderness, teaching them that both were essential. But beyond the measurable successes and the tangible legacy, Isaac and Penelope left something more important: the memory of a love that had started with simple kindness and grown into something unshakable. They had shown everyone who knew them what it meant to truly partner with another person, to build something lasting, to face whatever life brought with grace and determination. In Santa Rosa, their story became the kind of tale that people told their children and grandchildren. About the laundress who had worked until her hands bled, and the mountain man who had stopped to help her, and how that one moment of compassion had blossomed into a lifetime of love and devotion that shaped not just their own lives but the entire community around them. It became a story about the power of choosing kindness, about the courage it takes to accept help, about the beauty of two people finding each other at exactly the right moment. It became a story that reminded people that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments, that redemption and joy can spring from desperation and pain. And in the end, it was simply a love story, the best kind, the kind that was real and hard-won and absolutely true. A love story that began with bleeding hands and clean bandages, and grew into something that outlasted both the people who lived it and the era they lived in. A testament to what two people can build when they choose each other, every single day, for the rest of their lives.